How many of you love Disney movies? Any Disney movies? Everybody loves Disney movies, right? I love Disney movies. I know, you're thinking, Sean, you're such a strapping young man, a manly guy. You love Disney movies? I love Disney movies. I love Disney movies, but I'm not a big fan of the mouse, not a big fan of Disney World. Went there in February. Anybody Disney World people? Anybody love Disney World? Went to Disney World in February. And let me tell you what, never going back. Disney World, right? Come, be our guest, right? Disney World says, come, be our guest. Now, if I were to invite you over to my house and I said, come, be my guest, and I charged you hundreds of dollars to walk into my house, would you want to be my guest? If I made you wait 75 minutes in line just to watch television, would you want to be my guest? If I charged you $5 for an ice cream bar, $5 for a Mickey bar, $5 whole dollars for a Mickey bar. My first job, I made $3.35 an hour. I'd have to work 2 hours for a Mickey bar. That's insane. You wouldn't want to be my guest if I charged you $5 for a Mickey bar. And it's ice cream and chocolate. That's it. But it's in the shape of Mickey Mouse. Who cares? Goodness gracious. Yet millions, and I mean millions of people go to pay homage to the mouse every single year. And the mouse doesn't take his hands out of your pockets the whole time that you're there. In fact, it's even in the airport. There's a Disney store in the airport so that as you're going out, in case you forgot anything at Disney World, you can still pay money to the mouse before you leave. But nevertheless, I still like Disney movies. When I was in high school, that's when kind of Disney movies made a resurgence. We had movies like Beauty and the Beast and The Little Mermaid and Aladdin. And how many of you like Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, and Aladdin? Love those movies, right? I mean, they're great movies. And it's kind of the same story in all of them. You know, free-spirited girl falls in love with dopey guy. You know, even Frozen. I mean, Frozen's the same way. Free-spirited girl falls in love with dopey guy. They live happily ever after. And the problem with Disney movies is that they set us up for failure. Because Disney movies give us this idealistic picture of relationships and marriage. Disney movies make us think, oh, you know, it's all wonderful. It's all sunshine, lollipops, and rainbows. It's just wonderful all the time. And men and women have different ideals when it comes to marriage. Teenage boys and teenage girls have different ideals when it comes to marriage. Different views, different expectations. This is how marriage is going to be. You know, I notice like there are like young bride magazines and all these bridal magazines. There's got to be a dozen of them at least. All these bridal magazines. How many groom magazines are there? None. You know why? Because that's not what guys are thinking about. Girls are like, oh, I want to get married. I'm going to have a wonderful life. We're going to have a perfect husband. I'm going to have the perfect house. And I'm going to have the perfect kids named Tyler and Taylor. And it's just going to be wonderful. We're going to have the perfect life together. We're going to live happily ever after. Ladies, how's that working out for you? And guys, teenage guys, thinking about married life. One sex, and that's it all the time. That's what guys are thinking, right? Teenage boys. Guys, how's that working? Don't answer that question at all. But it's these unmet expectations, these unrealistic expectations that we have of marriage that makes us think that life is going to be perfect and wonderful and happy and joyful all the time. Little dwarves and little birds, you know, the bluebird of happiness sitting on your shoulder. Life's going to be great. It's going to be wonderful. And what happens? 50%, depending on the study that you read, 50%, it means 50% of marriages end up in divorce. 50%, half of them, 1 out of every 2, end up in divorce. What happened to the Disney ideal? It doesn't exist. And the problem is that we have our priorities wrong. You know, we think that, you know, life is going to be just perfect and life is going to be happy and life is going to be fulfilled. We have this unrealistic expectation that in order to live a fulfilled life, you got to be married. That marriage is the ultimate end-all, be-all to live a fulfilled life. That you can't live a fulfilled life if you're not married. Well, there's a lot of single people out there who are not married yet, or maybe have no desire to get married, and that's okay. You can live a fulfilled life without being married. It is possible. In fact, I believe that what we're going to talk about today will show us that it is possible. Now, marriage can be very fulfilling. Relationships are very fulfilling. But it's not the only way to live a fulfilled life. So we're going to talk about that today. We're going to start a brand new series called The Vow. And this series comes from Lifechurch in Oklahoma. One of the things that about my preaching that I struggle with sometimes is preaching on relationships and marriage, because I'm so bad at it. But one of the things that I struggle with is preaching about marriage and relationships. And so I like to go to outside sources to help me in those things, because I believe the Bible does talk a lot about our relationships and the importance of our relationships. I'm just not very good at applying scripture to relationships. And so I go to outside sources for help. And for this sermon series, we're going to go to Lifechurch in Oklahoma. It's a church of about 40,000 people. Pastor Greg Rochelle is their lead pastor, and he's really great. He's a great speaker. And this series that I'm going to preach for the next 4 weeks is loosely based on that sermon series that he preached a couple years ago. I'm not preaching it word for word, so the whole Disney thing, that was all me. Very funny, I know. Thank you very much. Anyway, this series comes from Lifechurch in Oklahoma. And what I want to talk about, we're going to talk about 4 vows that we make. Now, these are not the typical vows: love, honor, cherish, and obey. Though we don't do the obey one anymore, do we? You don't hear that anymore. It's like, obey. What? We just love, honor, and cherish till death do us part. It's all good. It's all good. But we're not going to talk about love, honor, cherish till death do us part. We're going to talk about 4 different vows. These 4 vows are these. Today we're going to talk about the vow of priority. The vow of priority, and making God your one and your spouse your two. We'll talk about that and what that means in just a minute. We'll unpack that in just a minute. Next week we're going to talk about the vow of pursuit and keeping after your spouse and pursuing your spouse no matter what. So we're going to talk about the vow of priority today. Next week is the vow of pursuit. Then we're going to talk about the vow of partnership. And then we're going to talk about the vow of purity. So those are the 4 vows we're going to look at. We're going to look at priority, pursuit, partnership, and purity over the next 4 weeks. And then in the month of November, we're going to do a series that I'm working on called Next Level, and it's about taking our church and taking our lives to the next level in our relationship with Jesus. So we're going to talk about Next Level in November, and then it's going to be Christmas time. We're going to talk about Christmas in the month of December. We're working on that as well. And then we got some cool things we're going to do in 2018. I'm telling you right now, 2018 is going to be the year of GFCC. It is going to be an amazing year. We've got some incredible stuff planned for 2018, and you're going to love it. You're absolutely going to love what we're going to do next year. If you love what we're doing now, it's going to be even better. When I talk about taking our church to the next level in 2018, that's exactly what we're going to do, and it is going to be amazing. So you do not want to miss it. You want to invite your friends, and for those of you who've invited your friends and family to come here and join us for this series, thank you for doing that. We're going to have a great time in this series on marriage. Now, where we are today is Matthew chapter 22, verses 36 through 40. If you brought your Bible, turn to Matthew 22. If you didn't bring a Bible, it's okay. You can grab one out of the chair in front of you. There should be one somewhere in the chair in front of you. Matthew 22, 36 through 40. It's on page 699 of that Bible in the chair in front of you. Or you can use your favorite app on your smartphone or tablet, like Bible Gateway or YouVersion, or the words will be up on the screen. The passages will be on the screen in just a moment. I want to look at Matthew 22, 36 through 40 first. I want to tell you a little bit about what was going on. It's the last week of Jesus' life. Jesus had gone into the city of Jerusalem with his disciples to celebrate the Passover feast. And so they go to Jerusalem, they're celebrating Passover. Now, they're going to celebrate Passover, but up until the time when they celebrate Passover, and the night before Jesus was crucified, the religious leaders were coming up and they were testing Jesus. They were asking him questions. They were trying to trip him up. They were trying to trap him in his words so that they could find a reason to accuse him and to kill him, because they were jealous of him. Because all the people who were used to be following the religious leaders like the Sadducees and the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, all of those people were now following Jesus. And so there was a lot of jealousy going on, a lot of illegitimate jealousy. And so they're looking for a way to trap Jesus in his words, to trip him up, and to kill him. And that's exactly what they ended up doing. We'll talk about that in just a second. So Jesus is in Jerusalem. He is they're trying to trip him up, and sure enough, here comes a Pharisee who was an expert in the law, a lawyer, and he comes up to Jesus and says this, "Teacher," verse 36, "which is the greatest commandment in the law?" Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments." Now you may be thinking, what does that have to do with marriage? Love God and love my neighbor. Well, let me tell you what. This is what it looks like. It has everything to do with marriage. And this is the vow of priority. God is your one and your spouse is your two. God is your one and your spouse is your two. See, Jesus says to love God with all of our heart, soul, and mind. Love God with all that you are. That's all that means. It's to love God with everything you have. Love God with everything you are. So if you are married or if you are not married, if you are divorced, if you are a widow, if you are a widower, if you are have never been married, or if you're looking to get married, if you're a teenager, this applies to every single one of us, all of us, that God is your one and your spouse is your two. God is your one and your spouse is your two. Say that with me real quick. God is your one and your spouse is your two. Okay? So that's what this whole thing has to do with is God is your one and your spouse is your two. And when we say that God is your one, we're going to love God with all of our heart, soul, and mind. And we're going to love our neighbor as ourself. Now, it's important to remember that your spouse is your neighbor. Say, what? Yeah, your spouse is your neighbor. Your neighbor is anyone who's around you, even people you don't like, which could be your spouse. Oh, I'm the only one who's never has times in my life when I haven't liked me, and my spouse hasn't liked me, right? No, you're all perfect. Okay, fine, let's close the book, let's go home. We all have those moments, right? So I love you. I don't like you very much right now. We have those moments. Your spouse is your neighbor. And when Jesus says, love your neighbor as you love yourself, means you need to love your spouse as you love yourself. Your spouse, your husband, your wife, or it could be your future husband or your future wife. It could be your significant other. Whoever that person is, you are to love your neighbor as yourself. God is your one, and your spouse is your two. Love God with all your heart, soul, and mind. Love your neighbor, including your spouse, as yourself. Now, when it comes to the vow of priority, the problem is that we jumble up our priorities sometimes. See, where God may be your one, or maybe your two, or maybe your three, and your spouse is your one, and God is your two, or your children are your one, and your spouse is your two, and God is your three. Those are messed up priorities. The vow of priority says, God is your one, and your spouse is your two. Period. And it has to be that way. To live a fulfilled life in marriage and in your relationship, God is your one, your spouse is your two. Not your children, not your job, not your recreational activities. God is your one, your spouse is your two. Because sometimes we'll put those things in number two, won't we? Or even number one. Sometimes we'll say, oh, God is my one, but my job is my two. Guys do this a lot, right? Guys think, I got to be a good provider for my family. Got to get out there and go to work. And what do? We become workaholics. And that's all we do is work and work and work and work. And we think to ourselves, I'm doing a good job. I'm providing for my family. And that shows that I love them. I'm providing for my family. No, it doesn't. It shows that your job is your priority, not your spouse, not your family. God is your one, your spouse is your two. Your kids are not your number two. They can't be. That's not a permanent relationship. I mean, it is, but it isn't. And that they're going to leave your house someday. Your spouse, that is your forever relationship. That is a relationship that doesn't end. God is your one, your spouse is your two. And it's easy to put your kids, right? I mean, they're needy. Man, are they needy, right? And your kids are needy. From the moment you hold them for the first time, your kids are needy. I mean, you tell a new parent that kids aren't needy, and they will hit you hard because they haven't slept in 3 days or 3 weeks or 3 months. Kids are needy, but they can't be number two. God is your one, your spouse is your two. Okay? Does that make sense? Now, when it comes to this idea of making God one and making your spouse two, it goes all the way back to Genesis. It goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden. In Genesis 2:24, God said, Moses wrote, "That is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh." Now, when you were growing up, your primary relationship, God is your one, but your parents are your two. Your primary relationship is with your parents when you're growing up in their house. Now, once you leave home, though, and the word leave there in Genesis is the word azab. It's a Hebrew word that means to loosen or relinquish. It means you're no longer under the jurisdiction of your parents. It doesn't mean you don't honor your parents, but it means that that is no longer the primary earthly relationship that you have. God is your one, your spouse is your two. You leave home and you cling to your spouse. You leave home and you cleave to your spouse. God is your one, and your spouse is your two. Now, what does it mean to love your spouse? And there's two passages in the New Testament that talk about this. One is in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 25, when Paul told husbands, it says, "Husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her." Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. How did Jesus love the church? He died for the church. He gave up his life for the church. He sacrificed everything for the church. Husbands, God is your one, and your wife is your two. God is your one, and your wife is your two. That means you got to be willing to lay down your life for her, to lay down your dreams for her, to lay down your job for her, to lay down everything for her. She is your two. God is your one, and your wife is your two. I mean, that's what Jesus did. He laid down his life for us. He laid down his life for the world. He died for the sins of the world. And he gave up his life for us. That if we'll believe in him and repent from our sins and confess our faith and get baptized, that God will wash away our sins, and we enter into that God is your one relationship. We enter into that relationship with God by his grace through faith in Jesus Christ. And we have that relationship with him. God is your one, your wife is your two, guys. And ladies, God is your one, your husband is your two. In Titus chapter 2, verses 3 and 4, Paul tells Titus, "Teach the older women to be reverent in the way they live, not to be slanderers or addicted to much wine, but to teach what is good. Then they can urge the younger women to love their husbands and children." God is your one, and your husband is your two. Because again, that relationship is going to last. That is that eternal relationship that you have in the bonds of marriage. God is your one, and your husband is your two. So ladies, love your husbands. Guys, love your wives as Christ loved the church. God is your one, your spouse is your two. Now I want to take a few minutes and I want to talk about I want to talk with two different groups of people. First, I want to talk to unmarried folks. So if you're unmarried, first of all, like I said earlier in the message, it doesn't mean you can't live a fulfilled life. The church does a very bad job of this. I have a friend of mine who tells me that the church does this very badly, is that we tell single people that it's not okay to be single. We tell single people that you have to get married, and that the only way you can live a fulfilled life is to get married, that the only way that you can find happiness and satisfaction in life is to be married. And that means that spouse is one. And remember, God is your one, and your spouse is your two. And if God is your one, you will find that life is more fulfilling than any other person could ever do. Your life will be more fulfilled if God is your one than if your spouse is your one, or if your future spouse is your one. So if you're single, it's okay. It's all right. And you're thinking, "Sean, no, it's not. I got to get married." Not until God says it's time. If God says it's time. Because God is your one. Let God be the one who fulfills you. Let God be the one who satisfies you. Let that relationship with God be the one that satisfies you most. Because that one, that will never, ever end. God is your one. Your spouse is your two. And if you're looking for a spouse, if you're looking for a godly guy or a godly girl, I love what Andy Stanley says. I love this Andy Stanley quote. Look at this. He says, "Become the person that you are looking for is looking for." Become the person you are looking for is looking for. So if you're looking for a godly guy or a godly girl, become a godly guy or a godly girl. Be that person who's looking for you. Become that person that they're looking for. Don't just go out and party all the time. Don't live a life the way that you wouldn't want someone else to live. Become the person you are looking for is looking for. And put God first. Because God is your one. And your spouse, future or not, God is your one, your spouse is your two. I also want to talk with married folks for just a little bit about how God is your one and your spouse is your two. One of the best things you can do, and I'm terrible at this, I need to do better on this, but one of the best things you can do with your spouse is to have date night. Have date night. And when it comes to date night, you got to do this. You got to ignore the phone and check out your spouse instead of ignoring your spouse and checking your phone. Does that make sense? Oh, yes, it does. You better believe it does. Because what do? Let's go out to dinner. Okay, where do you want to go? I don't care. You don't care about me. No, that's not true. I just don't care where we eat. You want to get pizza? No. Well, you do care. No, it's like, we do that, right? It's like, you want to go get Chinese? No. Well, then you do care. You want to get pizza? No. Well, see, you do care. You want to get burgers? No. Where do you want to go? I don't care. It's amazing to me that 50% of marriages end in divorce, but not a higher percentage end in homicide. But what do? Let's go out to dinner. Okay, fine, we're going to go out to dinner. We finally decide on a place to go eat. We're going to go sit down and we're going to eat. And then what do? Oh, time to order? I haven't even looked at the menu yet. Servers love that, by the way. I waited tables for a year and a half, and that was before smartphones. I couldn't even imagine doing it now. Ignore the phone and check out your spouse instead of checking your phone and ignoring your spouse. Have a date night. Set aside one night a month to say, this is our date night. Third Friday night of the month is date night. Somebody calls up, hey, we're going to go out on Friday night. Sorry, can't. What do you mean you can't? It's date night. No, you can skip date night. Nope, nothing interferes with date night. Because again, God is your one and your spouse is your two. Not your friends, not your kids. Drop the kids off at grandma's house. Grandma will thank you. She will spoil your kids. She will fill them full of candy and send them back home. That's the price you pay for having children and being mean to your parents when you were a teenager. It's true. God is your one and your spouse is your two. Make your spouse a priority. Make your spouse a priority. So ignore the phone and check out your spouse instead of checking your phone and ignoring your spouse. Have that date night. Spend that time together. Go out with one another. Enjoy one another. Here's the problem, is that when we are dating our spouse, or when we are dating our spouse, they are our priority. They're up there. God is one, spouse is two. Future spouses too. All right. I really like this girl. She's really amazing and she's awesome and I love her so much. Oh, I'm so in love. And we'll do anything for them. Man, I was such a dork. I was such a nerd, such a geek when I was dating Shannon. I mean, I remember when I first fell head over heels for her and I'm giving her foot rubs. And we were at a retreat, right? So we're at this retreat and there was a couple who had a brand new baby. And I'm like holding the baby and stuff and all this. And I'm like, look, daddy skills. That's what I was thinking. That's what I was thinking. I'm like, look, I'm great. I'm marriage material, lady. And so I'm like trying to show off and everything like that. And now it's funny. We were at my brother's house last night, and they have a brand new puppy. They got a brand new 10-week-old dog. She's like, you want to hold the puppy? I'm like, no. She's like, he's so cute. I'm like, I don't care. It's a dog. You want to hold the baby? Nah, not really. Been there, done that. Got an 11-year-old. I'm fine now. Tapped out for life. I'm good. No. And so we forget to woo our spouse. We stop dating our spouse. We stop wooing our spouse. And we think to ourselves, I've got him or I've got her. I don't need to date her anymore. I don't need to date him anymore. That's not true. You need to make your spouse a priority over your kids, over your job, over your recreational activities, whatever they are, fantasy football, fantasy crocheting, I don't know, whatever. God is your one, and your spouse is your two. So this is the vow of priority. I promise that God will be my first priority and that my spouse will be my second. I promise that God will be my first priority and my spouse will be my second. Would you say that with me? I promise that God will be my first priority and my spouse will be my second. That's the vow of priority. That's the vow that we all need to make. So whether you're married yet or not married, or just recently married, or getting married, or been married 30 years or 40 years, God is your one and your spouse is your two. And if we'll do that, if we will make our spouse a priority, if we will love our spouse and woo our spouse and date our spouse, we will demonstrate to the world what a healthy relationship, what a healthy marriage looks like. And maybe we can lower those percentages a little bit. And maybe we can show the world this is what a fulfilled life looks like. It's when God is your one and your spouse is your two. And we just might see some transformed lives. And we might see some transformed communities. And a transformed world. God is your one. And your spouse is your two.